Okay, thank you. I'm excited to be back here again. I was here a year ago. I did my Wash Day program, and several years ago, my wife and I, who passed away 2 years ago, we were doing one of our programs, and she said to me, "Why don't you buy an iron to close out your Wash Day program?" I said, "Honey, it's a good idea." But as soon as she said it, she had a look on her face. She knew she made a mistake. When I start a hobby, I go overboard. I go out of control. So I did. I bought an iron, one that was made in 1930, and it was really nice. The next time we went to an antique store, I picked up another iron. And she says, "Why are you looking at that? We just bought one." I said, "But it's different." So I wound up with 300 or 400 irons, and they're from all over the world. And I developed a storyline, and I made a show out of it, and this is it. And I hope you enjoy it. I did about 70 of these shows so far, and they've been well received. And I'm going to start out my program tonight with something that has nothing to do with Wash Day or Ironing Day. You all recognize this figure? It's Colonel Sanders. Nothing to do with my program, but it's a funny, true story. We had a grandbaby born in Western Tennessee, maybe 10 years ago or so. And I was in an antique store, and I'm looking at this. My wife said, "Why are you looking at that? It's got nothing to do with Wash Day or Ironing Day." I said, "Yeah, but it's pretty cool." And this was a promotional giveaway by Kentucky Fried back in the 1950s. And it's a little plastic bank. So I says, "I'm going to fit it in." So I did. I fit it into the Wash Day program, and I told folks about my granddaughter and et cetera. And one day we were going to Tennessee. We're driving through Kentucky. And I saw a sign for Corbin, Kentucky. I had a friend that had a ministry there for decades, and he told me that that's where Colonel Sanders opened his very first store. So I says to my wife, "Let's go there. We can say we've been there." So we went there. We had chicken. If my assistant can. I took pictures. My wife is standing in front of the doorway to the very first restaurant, and then there's a picture of me feeding a piece of chicken to a life-size ceramic figure of Colonel Sanders. So that's how he became part of my program. A few years ago, we're in Philadelphia. We set up about an hour before showtime, and my wife and I had our back towards these 3 or 4 ladies that came in and sat where you two girls are. I never met these people before in my life. They certainly didn't know me. But I had Colonel Sanders standing up here looking out. The one lady said to her friend, referring to little old me, "He must think he's hot stuff. He's got a statue of himself on the table." It's a true story. My wife looked at me and we just laughed, but they were dead serious. I have a friend that I worship with. My hair used to be longer and my goatee was a little fuller. And he tells me, he says, "You do look like Colonel Sanders." And when they change their interior decorations, he always brings me a piece and I hang it up in my office. But true story. I'm going to show you a picture of this lady here. I'm not going to tell you her name because with these smartphones, you'll know all about her before I get to talk to her. But this lady here, such a smart person, single-handedly, she saved the cotton industry in the South. A brilliant woman, 55 patents to her credit. They should make her a national holiday. I hope they speak about her in school today. The lady was a genius. At the age of 14, she graduated high school. At 14, she entered Tulane University in Louisiana, and at the age of 16, she had a 4-year degree. Brilliant lady. And she earned these patents when it was not common for women to be recognized. So I'm going to, can you put this on the end, please? So I'm going to talk about her later, and just briefly, I have 4 sons and 4 daughters. Only one of my daughters appreciates my antiques. She has her own little collection. But the other 7 appreciated the fact that Mom and I did these shows together, and we traveled all over the state. I mean, we were car people, and we made a day of it. We used to live up in the northern tier, so I used to go to Williamsport, Hughesville doing shows, and I used to visit my friends up there while we were there. But my youngest daughter gave me this license plate years ago. I was telling these ladies earlier how I got started in all this, because my background doesn't reflect anything you see up here. If my friends saw me do this that I worked with back in the day, they'd run me out of town. My background, I was in the Army, I served in Korea, I was a helicopter ambulance. For a living, I was a technician on a commuter railroad. I retired from there. For a few years, my wife and I built race cars, but then when I got to be 75, she says, "You're not going to drive this one. You're done." So, but I have more fun doing this. I like being with people. My wife did. My wife was shy in the beginning, and she helped me. She was a good helper, but she didn't put her heart into it because I really did spend a lot more than I should have. I go out of control. But after a while, I'd start talking, and my wife would do like this and push me in the background. And she took over. I was so excited because she got into it, and she really had fun doing it. And we're both people persons, so it was great. And when my wife died, I was going to sell off everything, but my doctors, my nurses said, "You love doing it, continue doing it." And this is my 512th show tonight. So I love doing it. A few months after my wife passed away, my little beloved cat passed away, and I was heartbroken. And this is a picture of my little cat that died. She was a Siamese, and what do you think I named her? Yes. And she knew her name. The cat that I have now, she's another Siamese, and my kids got her for me right away because I don't like an empty house. And I named her Rosie the Riveter, and she answers to her name. My cats mean everything to me. I'm going to start out with this. This is actually an iron, and if you guys don't mind, I had surgery recently and I get very tired, so I'm going to sit and drag this along. But this iron, I don't know the exact age, but it's bronze, and I think it's close to 2,000 years old. Chinese used these pans, and they would fill them with hot coal, and if you can hold that. And the way it would work, it'd take a few people to do the ironing. They would, let's say this was a tablecloth or something that was big, you would hold it taut and then run this pan over it, and you would press it like that. In fact, it was trade with Europe in the 12th century that the Europeans learned how to press clothes, and it was from China. And this one has little decorations around it. It's got a dragon and things like that.
Where did you find that?
I don't remember. I've been to every antique store between here and Florida. But, I know where I found that. There was a man and wife that I met several years ago. He was a vintage pressing iron collector for over 50 years. And he's from Northumberland County. And I got one of his business cards many years ago, and I made contact with him. Believe it or not, his name was Irons. Dave and Sue Irons, big-time collector. And I bought a few things from him, and that's one of the pans I bought from him. It doesn't have the original handle. Usually they were ivory and carved and really pretty. And the price for those things can be thousands of dollars. So I bought the no frills. I made my own handle, but it serves the same purpose. This little thing here, It's 1,000 years old. The Vikings used these to press their clothes. This is called a slicken stone, but it's actually spun glass. It's solid, it's very heavy. I don't think there's any air bubbles in it because over the years it's been dropped several times. And the way this works, you'd put it in the palm of your hand and you wouldn't heat it up. It'd be the weight of the stone, and then again, you would hold the fabric taut and you would run it across and you would generate a little bit of heat. Some of you ladies been ironing for decades. You might never given any thought onto what has to take place. You have to break the molecular bonds of the fibers. And you usually do that with heat and weight. And their fibers are stretched to a new position, and they will retain that new position when the fabric cools. That's all that has to happen. All these gadgets up here have to accomplish that, or else it's not going to work. So this is over 1,000 years old. We can pass that around because it's not heavy. I gotta tell you a couple of jokes. I did a show for a church about a week ago, and the pastor, fairly young guy, he knew what kind of a program we were doing, and it was the Ironing Day program. So he looks at me seriously and he said that my parents were in the iron and steel business. I says, wow, that's pretty unique. So he said, my mother irons while my father steals. That's a pastor that told me that. So I found another one online, and then I'm going to end my jokes. What kind of medical condition causes wrinkled clothes? Iron deficiency. I don't know how these people think of these things. This here is called a smoothing board or a mangle, but they're more referred to as a smoothing board. It's a two-piece set, and that linen my unpaid assistant had before, like a tablecloth or something large, maybe drapes, who knows. You would wrap it tightly around this pin. Okay, well, they get the idea. You'd wrap it tightly around the pin. You would put the pin on the table. You would hold this board to a right angle to the pin, and you would roll it back and forth like that. They do work, and this came from one of the Scandinavian countries, and this is about 800 years old. Now, this one is a no-frills board. The one thing they have in common is the handle is almost always shaped like a horse. Mine has no fancy carvings in it, and probably 300 or 400 years ago, the ears got broken off the horse. So I was happy to buy it at a discount price because it still serves a purpose. But back in the day, these would be given as wedding presents. It might have the bride's name carved in it, the year of their wedding, and then have ornate carvings all through it. If you find them today and they're in good condition with all these fancy carvings, they're worth a bundle. That fella I met by the name of Dave Irons, who's deceased, he had a huge auction when his health was failing in Pittsburgh, and he had maybe 30 or 40 of these fancy ones. Each one brought thousands of dollars at auction. They're very rare, very hard to find. And in fact, I got this one from him. It's my no frills. This is one of my oldest irons. This probably goes back to the very early 1600s. Before the Mayflower came over here from England, ships with skilled craftspeople came first, like blacksmith, because they had to make implements and support the farmers, etc., so they could survive. This is a very early one. My wife picked this up first, and looked at it and thought it was unusual. And she put it back down, and I came over and looked at it, and the way the handle is twisted, you can tell it's not machine made, it's not uniform. And where the plate of the iron is, the handle is not connected on this one end. And I think they did that maybe to keep the handle a little bit cooler, because these were heated up over a fire. So this is a very, very early sad iron. This one, I don't think it weighs more than a pound, if that. But it is a very, very old one. This here is another sad iron. This one dates 1870, and it was made by a man by the name of Hood, and it's got the date on it. But this one's pretty unusual. It has a point on one end, which most of them did, but it has an iron handle. And since these were heated over a fire, to hold it, you'd have to use a pot holder or a very, very thick piece of rag or garment. But this one's unusual because it has a piece of soapstone in between the plate and the handle. When I first heard of soapstone, I mean, I was a novice. I wasn't the expert that I am now. And I thought maybe when you wet it, it foams up or something. I didn't know, but it's not. Soapstone is ideal for irons. First of all, it's easy to carve. And a lot of you young women today, when they redo a kitchen, they get soapstone countertops because it is easy to shape. And when you buff it up and shine it and seal it, it makes for a nice surface that's easy to clean. But for the use of an iron, it has two characteristics that make it ideal for ironing. It very quickly will absorb high heat temperatures. So it heats up very quickly, but it's very slow to radiate. So it gets hot probably in 15 or 20 minutes, and you could probably iron for 30 or 40 minutes before it cools off. And it's lighter than the iron itself. And this company made them by the millions, and they were a big hit. Now, ordinarily, when you heat one of these irons up on the stove, potbelly stove, cook stove, maybe even an open fire, you can't put the surface right on the stove because of the soot. And once this is hot, you can't clean it. So you might have what they call it's a cast iron, like a big iron plate. You'd lay that on top of the stove, and then you would put this inside the plate, kept it nice and clean. So that was a good deal. But then a guy invented something pretty unique. When I saw this at the antique store, can you all hear me in the back okay? When I saw this, it had a release here, and the handle folded back. And I'm thinking, why the heck did it do that? So nobody knew. So we called the owner, and he says, well, I don't know. I said, well, if you ever find out, maybe I'll buy the thing. He called me right back. He researched it. The guy that invented this, and this has a patent date of 1870. When you're going to use this iron, instead of putting it directly on the stove in a little tray or something to keep it clean, you release the handle, fold it back, turn it over, and this side makes contact with the stove. So the surface you're going to press the clothes with never gets soot on it. So it eliminated one step. But back in those days, maybe it was a big deal. It made life easier. This one here was invented by a woman by the name of Mary Florence Potts. 1870, she was a 19-year-old married woman, and she designed an iron. Previously, they had one point, and if you wanted to iron something behind you, you had to turn with the iron so you could go around buttonholes, etc. Now, no big deal to us today, but nobody ever thought about it. She invented an iron with 2 points. You didn't have to turn around. You could just look behind you. You could go around the buttons and the buttonholes, etc. And Mrs. Potts, in 1870, was awarded a patent for this. That was a big deal because it was 50 years before ladies were allowed to vote in this country. See how far you came, ladies? Now, when I used to start with that, my wife would look at me and I knew, don't go too far, you're going to get in trouble. But it's true. She was given a patent the following year. Now, at this time, she licensed different foundries to make her newfangled iron. One of the places was Enterprise in Philly. Big foundry. Well, they started making these, selling them all over the country. The following year, she improved on her original invention. She now sold them in sets of 3 bases to the set with 1 removable handle. She was the first one to do it. And it was cheaper to buy because you bought 3 bases, different sizes, and you bought 1 removable handle. But also, she invented the wooden handle, and I think it's walnut. Wood does not absorb heat like iron does, so you no longer needed the pot holder. And now, if you're all paying attention, 3 cheers for Mrs. Potts. Yay, yay, yay. My wife used to think that was corny. But anyway, very important lady. Okay. I have up here, I'm going to show you one. It's actually a brand new set. I have a set of 3. These are 2 different sizes, removable handle, and this is patented August 27th, 1907. Beautiful condition. They're nickel plated, and this one has a snoot on the front of it, and this was called a sleeve iron. It'd go inside and iron your sleeves. They came in different weights, and also the snoot, different lengths for different types of ironing. And like Mrs. Potts, it has a removable handle. Could you give me the tissues, please? It's on the side. Okay. Thank you. Maybe someday I'll start paying you, but I doubt it. But I do feed her. This one here, and this is a light one compared to some I've had. I've had some that weigh close to 40 pounds. But this is a commercial tailor's iron. And this one weighs probably 20-something pounds. This one is made by Simplicity. It has a removable handle, which you could put on different size irons. And these were commercial irons made by tailors, made different things, but also in the north, all the way across the top of the country. Well, when I lived on the northern tier, my neighbor, my friend, was a dairy farmer, and his wife used to take care of the heifers and the newborns. That was her task. And she'd be out there in the winter. And I'll tell you, cold, windy days, I'd go by, I'd toot the horn and wave, and she didn't even look up. She was trying to keep warm. But the clothing material of choice in the harsh winters was wool. And it takes a lot of weight and heat to press wool, especially on the seams. So a lot of the housewives in the northern part of the country use these. When I was born, my mother named me Robert, but everybody called me Bobby. My brother was the goody-goody two-shoes. Trouble seemed to seek me out. And if my mother stuck her head out that wooden screen door and hollered, "Robert," I would run in the other direction because I knew she busted me for something. And I pictured my mother having muscles like Popeye. And I used to think it was because of the iron she had, because I couldn't pick it up. But these things, I mean, I've had them where they weigh 40 pounds. This here is called a fluter. And these go back to the, I'd say, early 1800s. And if you've seen pictures of judges and lawyers back in the day, they would have crimpled collars and crimpled cuffs and things like that. Well, these things here are called fluters. And this one here, you could use the handle. You would pick the lids up on your potbelly stove, and there's a little weight in here, an ingot, and you would put maybe the whole thing or just the ingot on a heat stove, get it nice and hot, and then the garment that you want to put the pleats in, you would dip it in starch. And this goes back to the days when you couldn't go to, I used to say A&P, but they went by way of the dinosaur. But before you could go to the store to buy your starch, ladies used to make their own starch out of corn, rice, and potato. And they would boil the water, throw the starch in there, dip the garment, and then they would put the starch garment across this thing. And this type, you would just wheel it like that. And you would put the pleats in. And I have a different type here, which does the same thing. I'll tell you, the work that people used to do, I had a friend that lived in Mount Joy, and this little iron here was made at a foundry there in Mount Joy, and he couldn't believe it. And I'll tell you, these are hard to come by. The removable handle is so well designed, it just fascinated me. I had to buy it. And all those years later, the thing works as good today as it did back then. I have back here some new packages of starch when they became available in the supermarkets, which made it easier. The ladies didn't have to make it. At the turn of the 20th century, I'd say 1905 or so, women wore blouses, and it was fashionable to, I forget the name of it, my wife used to know, but they would puff up the top of their shoulders. They would starch it and use an iron like this. This is called an egg iron, and this would be heated up over a potbelly stove, but it wouldn't be put directly on the stove for reasons I explained. And they would take this egg and put it underneath the shoulder, and when it dried, it would make it puffy, okay? A lot of work. Next, I have, this one has some weight to it. This is called a magic iron, and this one has an ingot in it. This thing weighs a few pounds. This, again, this type of iron, you didn't need to put this one on the stove. You could keep it nice and clean. But you would put this on top of the stove, get this nice and hot, and then with tongs or a pot holder, you would drop it back in here, and then you could put the top on and probably have 30, 40 minutes worth of enjoyable ironing. This one, this is in its original condition. I refinished the handle. The handle's original, but this is the original color. And when this was in the hardware store for sale, that's how it looked. It's copper clad, but in the back it has a little gate, and this is called an ox tongue iron. And they call it that. I never owned an ox, but I'm told that if you could open its mouth and look in there, the tongue is shaped like that. And they call it an ox tongue iron. And, thank you, you would put this poker that you used to stoke your fire, you would put it through that hole, drop it down into the oven, get this thing red hot, and then gently drop it in the back of the iron, close the gate, and off you go. Maybe 30 minutes of ironing. That thing has some weight to it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. But like I said, you usually need weight and heat. Now, some fabrics, you've got to sprinkle. I'm sure you ladies did. Sprinkling bottles. Sometimes you could get a little aluminum one with holes in it. You stick it in an empty soda bottle. But this one here, we were in an antique store in New Oxford, which is near Gettysburg. My wife had a good eye, and she knew what I would want to buy. And if I went over the budget, she would not be happy to point something out. But I always kept one eye on her, because I would walk right past things, and she had the patience to stop and look. And she had one of the girls unlock a cabinet and took this thing out. My wife looked at it, then she looked at the price on the bottom. She put it right back, and she wanted to see if I was around. Dead eye saw her. I went over to where this thing was, and I looked at it, and she said, it is pretty unique, and it has a lot of information cast in the front of it and on the bottom. So I started reading it, and this was made in Jeannette, Pennsylvania. Anybody know where Jeannette?
Yeah.
Do you?
I had a friend live there.
Okay, suburb of Pittsburgh. I think just east of Pittsburgh. And I started researching it because there was so much information on it. And I was all excited. My wife is saying, oh, why did I take that out? But I researched it. Jeannette, Pennsylvania was settled in the very early 1800s, mainly because they had natural gas in that town. And to produce, to have a glass factory, you need natural gas. And they call this the Egyptian sprinkler. It's for sprinkling clothes, carpets, and floors, etc. And I did a show in Redland for a senior center, and I believe it was south of Harrisburg, maybe in Dauphin County. And I'm doing the show, and I got to talk about this. And there's a guy there, young guy, he kept staring at me. I thought, gee, do I owe him money or something? But he kept staring and staring. I thought, well, maybe what I'm saying is interesting. After I did the segment on this, he told me that he's with the Historical Society in Jeannette. And he said, I can't believe what you knew about this and the factory. I said, well, I got it online. There was so much on the bottle. Now, this goes to the early 1800s because the glass has little air bubbles in it, and that can help you date it. So he had never seen one of these. So he says to my wife, can I look at that? She hands it to me. We didn't see him again for about 40 minutes. I'm ready to send my wife out, get the police. Where'd this guy go? So he comes back to me, and he took all kinds of pictures. And he said, I've got to take these pictures back and show it. We just never saw one. So about a week later, he got our address, and he sends me a little handwritten note, some information from, and he was on the city council and involved in the Historical Society. So he wrote me a very kind note, and then he sent me a picture, a copy of the glass factory where that thing was made in the 1800s. And then he sent me a picture of the lady who the town was named after, Jeannette. Her name was Jeannette McKee, and he was one of the founders of the town. And I only share that because when you talk about the smallest little detail and you start to research it, it's how it grows. You know, you meet people. Okay. Now, we're talking about starch. They had a special iron. This one here is dated 1846, December 5th. Yeah, they even put the month and the day. But this is all smooth and rounded off. There's no sharp points on it. And I said before, when you're going to starch something, you dip the garment in the liquid starch. And so the iron doesn't stick to what you're ironing, the garment doesn't. You can rub beeswax, and they sold commercial products like this little thing here with a little handle. So that's called a polishing iron. I next have this pretty porcelain iron, and I bought it because I like the color. I'd like to have a car like that. And it's all porcelain, and it's a natural gas iron, and it has the original trivet, and this was made in Scotland. I'm not sure of the year. And this was so important to the Scottish people that they have this exact same iron in their the Museum of Scotland. And underneath the handle, the top plate, there's about 15 little brass nozzles that are pointing down towards the plate, and you would light it with a match. These things were very, very safe, and you could iron for hours safely, and of course you had to have natural gas piped into your town, which would be under Main Street, and then a plumber would tap into that and bring natural gas into your house. But these were very, very safe. Pardon me? They had a fire? Yeah. You would light, you'd have an off and on valve, and then when you want to use it, you would open the valve a little bit, and you would strike a match and hold it to the side, and then it would light. And they were very, very safe, hardly any maintenance at all. And this is a gas iron, and this one has a brass tag on it and a serial number, and it was manufactured in New York. And they called it a steam iron, but it was a gas iron. Now, this one here has a tank on it. What do you think would go in that tank? Water?
Kerosene?
Okay. And you think water? Steam iron?
I was thinking oil.
Huh?
No, I don't know.
Gasoline. But they also had them with propane, alcohol. These were very dangerous. We did a show one year. Could I have a sip of water? We did a show one year in Philly. And there was a gentleman there, an elderly gentleman. It was a nursing home. Thank you. Back in the day, he was a city fireman. And he said at least once a day, they were putting out house fires due to these gas irons. Now, I know you ladies haven't had experience with it, but maybe some of you guys rebuilt carburetors and stuff over the years. It has to be perfect. Every fitting has to be in good condition and just has to be tight enough. If not, gasoline will leak. They gave you instructions, but most people couldn't follow it. And I've had the instructions, and I used to rebuild race cars. You had to know what you were doing and take your time. After this fireman told me that, whenever we went to an antique store, I always looked at them, and a lot of times the whole bottom of the handle would be burnt away from where they caught on fire. You do take care of me.
Oh, you're welcome.
Now, this one here is pretty unique. When you want to put gas in it, there's an exact measure gas can. You can't put too much. There's a hole up near the top, which means you can't overfill it. So you would put the gas up to the hole, then empty the contents in the gas tank. Then you would put the cap back on. And this model is pretty unique. It has built in the gas cap a little pump, which still would work. And you build up maybe 4 pounds of pressure. Now, I did this in a nursing home several years ago. It's the only time I did it. We had ladies, elderly ladies, sitting in the front row, and I went like this on the table. I picked a match up quick, and I went, the whole front row jumped about 3 feet out of their chairs. But then you would hold it to this little hole in the front here, and like the natural gas, there are many nozzles under here pointing down towards the plate. But if it lit and you didn't have a fire, you could iron for hours. It got heated up quickly. You didn't have to stop and let it reheat. So they were really good.
Unless the house burned.
If your house didn't burn down. And if your house burns down, you don't have to iron anyway. You got nothing left. I have a derby from the 1900s that I bring, and I forgot to pack it. But these are irons that would be used to press men's top hats, derbies, and then them real tall ones. And this goes back to the 1800s, and you can see the way it's shaped. You would use this to go around the outside brim of the hat, and if it was soiled, there's a new old stock can of powder, and it's called the Handy Hatter. You would sprinkle this on the hat and then brush it, and it would clean it up really nice. And this iron here, the homes that had natural gas, you might have a little light, pilot light, on the wall in your parlor. This would hook on that fixture above the flame. And there's large holes in the bottom where the heat would go, and then smaller holes here. And the reason is to keep the heat in there so it would get the iron hot. This has a patent date on the base, 1894. And there's different concave surfaces here. You would use this surface maybe to go around the top part of the hat, and then other surfaces to heat it up. So the work that men went into to look prim and proper, they did a lot of work. They took pride today, like our youth today, right? But they really did. My father worked for the railroad. I spent time in the military, and I learned how to spit shine my shoes. My father took pride in his shoes, and I still have his brushes. I shine my church shoes maybe every 6 months, but I couldn't match the shine my father used to get. Every day he would wash them, then sit for hours, polishing them. Amazing. But he took pride in it, and I respect that. This is called a gophering iron. It's got a hollow barrel. There are some that had 3 and 4 barrels, different diameters. Some had monkey designs on them. Some were really fancy. Some are really valuable. But again, my wife only let me buy the no frills. This one has a single barrel, and then it has a heater. You would stick this down in the fire, and then when this got red hot, you would put it in here. It would heat the barrel. Now, when ladies, wealthy ladies came to this country in the 1600s from big cities, London, Paris, etc., they brought with them clothing fitting their wealth, befitting their wealth. On some of their skirts, and they had clothing that was layered. I mean, you've seen pictures, beautiful. And they might have a 36-foot piece of a ribbon that would be pressed on this gophering iron. My unpaid will show you. So this would be hot. This could be starched, or maybe not, I'm not sure. But they would press it on this barrel. And then they would weave these ribbons into the hem of their skirt, weave it in and out. There might be several layers of that. Very fancy dress. Can you imagine, and newspapers of the day support what I'm going to say to you. Can you imagine a lady who just left the farm, who had her muck boots on, was working, you know, she smelled like who knows what, coming down, and this lady's coming towards her on the sidewalk with a parasol so she didn't get sun on her. And you see this other lady that could care less. She didn't even wash her hands. The dress of those wealthy ladies caused a lot of civil unrest back in the 17 and 1800s. It really did. And you could understand why. But these were only manufactured in Europe. They never made them in this country. Next, what I'm going to show you, did I miss anything?
No.
Oh. Any ideas what this would be used for? This thing is so rare, and the condition, I was so happy to get it. Do you have any ideas? Huh? This is used to put the crease in men's pants. Can you imagine? And these, I used to be strong, but I'm not anymore. But I can't imagine a woman holding that. I mean, I need two hands. And this is not electric. And I made this out of a sardine can, and I poured red wax in there, and I wanted it to look like one of the old Sterno cans, if you remember, but to find one for this is just impossible. But they would have a little can of Sterno made for this, and it has a little tray here. You would slip that in here, like that. Light it, and it would heat up this part here. And then, when that was hot, you would open it up and run it down the seam of your trousers. That's how they press the seam. And my wife said, I want to try it on you. With your pants on. I said, that'll be the day you're going to do that. I wouldn't trust her. So I said, that's not how they did it. Let's keep the story honest. So then we found this one. It does the exact same thing, only it's electric. And this is from the early 30s, I think, or 20s, because there's no thermostat. And what you would do is open it here. This would be heated up. And you would open this and then run it down the crease of your trousers. So then, inside the box that it came in, my wife saw the instructions, and it's a little advertisement. And here she shows to me, there's a picture of a guy wearing his pants, and another guy is pressing his trousers. She said again, I want to try it on. I said, forget about it. I'm going to talk about toys. Toys were very important back in the day for two main reasons. On wash day or ironing day, if you had a large family, Mom had a full day's worth of work, especially with the instruments I've shown you. So toys were important. Number one, it kept the child occupied. And number two, they were educational. And this is a little wooden toy, but over a period of a few years, Mom would explain to the child how the ironing process works. Because on the old irons that I showed you, there are no thermostats, not even off and on switches, nothing. Different fabrics required different temperatures of heat. And the only way you could determine it was if you were by yourself and nobody was looking, you might take the iron off the stove and spit on it. But if you had company there, or one of your children, you might have a water finger bowl, and you would sprinkle the water on the base of the iron, and you would judge the temperature by the rate of evaporation. That's how you told the heat of the iron, but you had to know what kind of fabric and what kind of heat it required. So there was a lot to learn, because there comes a time when the child is still young, and I use my wife's name, and I say, the child goes running to the toy box this particular day, and Mom says, Susie, no more toys. We're giving them to Cousin Jesse. Today you're going to iron the clothes. But back then, it took many people in the family to make the family work. They all had chores today. And I'll tell you, my wife, when our kids were little, each one had a chore to do. To this day, we could never figure out when it was time for the boys to do the dinner dishes, they didn't have them in the water long enough to clean them. And when I was in the Army, we used to check the trays. If your finger didn't squeak, they were greasy. But they did a good job. I don't know how they did it so fast to this day. I don't even know if they used soap. But they never failed the test. But they all had chores to do, and it kind of kept them out of trouble. So toys were very, very important. This is a different type. This is a little metal one. And they even had some toy irons that you could plug in. They were electric. They would heat up. But I'll tell you, I've taken some of those apart, and I'm surprised more kids weren't electrocuted. It shocked you?
No, but
Okay.
you could plug it in.
Yeah, but they were not made good at all. Okay.
Well, I have one that was a solid iron, and you could put it on the stove.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But I'm talking about the electric ones, because the insulation, I'm surprised they even work. And I used to be an electrical technician. I wouldn't even fix them. Anybody know what this is? My wife said, why are you buying that? I said, because it's an iron. It's a curling iron heater. And this one's natural gas. You'd put the flexible hose on the end. Here's your open and close valve. And you would light it with a match, and there'd be an open flame in here. And back in the day, I remember my first cousins. They used to sit on the floor in their mom's living room, and they would do each other's hair for hours with curling irons. And you would lay the curling iron on the heater like that, and it would get hot, and then you would open it up and wrap the hair in there, and there'd be pretty curls. This little one, my wife found in an antique store, and we didn't know what it was for, and the lady said it was used for men's handlebar mustaches years ago. I saw one a few months ago, man. The guy took pride in it. It was way out like that. But they would curl it and then wax it somehow. So my wife bought it. Unknown to me, the next show we did, she had this thing. Excuse me. Thank you. But she had it planned. And she snuck up behind me and hooked it on the end of my mustache like that. But I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know she was going to do it. It scared me half to death. She used to do things like that to get a laugh, and then she says, listen to the big bad man, he squealed like a little girl. But I thought a mouse jumped off the wall and landed on my face, because the way it pulled, I didn't know what it was. But she had fun like that. My wife used to stand behind me, and when I'd be doing my talk, she'd be doing little funny things. And I thought the people were laughing at things I said. But one day I didn't say anything funny. And I turned around quick, and it was some antics that she was doing. But she was a lot of fun. The people enjoyed it. Okay. Now, I just showed you curling irons. I'm going to show you an electric iron. This one has no thermostat. It's a pretty old one. No off and on switch. And the little contacts back here are square, so it kind of dates it. And this is made by Westinghouse. And this one has a removable handle, but it's in nice condition. But while you're ironing your clothes, it has a slot for the curling iron. And you could heat up the iron and kill two birds with one stone. And while I'm thinking about it, there's an iron I forgot to show you. This one here it's a sad iron, and it's called a cavity iron. You would put hot coal in there, okay? And then you would put the lid back. And you would regulate the temperature by these little dampers on the side. And you notice how low it is? Can you imagine ironing your white blouse for church on Sunday? And if you just bump it, soot can come out of here. But it's got 2 chimneys. Can you imagine ironing your white blouse with smoke coming out of the chimneys? I mean, you told me that didn't take skill. But that's called a cavity iron. Okay. Now, the first iron, electric iron, was available on the market around 1870. But they didn't sell too good. Hardly anybody bought them. Anybody know why?
Hardly anybody had electric.
That's right. True story in Ontario, Canada. I add a little bit of nonsense to it, but the story is true. They had a power company up there in Ontario, and this was in the early 1870s. And some of the ladies had electricity going to their houses. And, you know, the electricity going to houses then, the houses weren't built for it, and it was added later. You might only have one outlet in the parlor, maybe one in the kitchen. And the wiring was usually external. And the ladies had the new iron, and they wanted to use them. But the power company usually put the power on at night for the street lanterns only. So all the women get together, and I'd say maybe 60 ladies. They all went on the front lawn of the power company, and one of the ladies that represented the group went up and knocked on the big steel door at the front of the building. And this old guy comes out. He looked like he didn't shave in a month. His tie was filthy. He was a mess of wrinkles, scrungy looking guy. And he came out and he looked all around and he seen all these women gathered there. So he's thinking to himself that they're here for no good reason. They're here to start trouble. And he wanted to go back in his office and go to sleep. So he's scanning everybody, and he's getting angrier by the minute. And he's ready to lash out. All of a sudden, he sees his wife in the crowd. And he jumps back and he says, "May I help you, ladies?" But now that's nonsense. But, well, it could have happened. Who knows? But the truth is, it did happen. And the lady said, "Turn the power on Tuesday afternoon, please, for a couple of hours so we can use our new irons." And they said that if you don't, you're going to go to work a mess of wrinkles next week. We're not going back to the old-fashioned irons. True story. Basically, it's a true story. Oh, this thing's heavy. This one I bought, it's not that rare, but it's the only one I've ever seen. And it's all porcelain. And it's called a quality iron. And it was made in Illinois. But it's pretty heavy. But there's no chips in it. But there are some hairline cracks from being heated and cooled off so many times. So it's a nice white looking porcelain. This here is the first steam iron that actually worked. The first steam iron with a thermostat was produced in the late 1920s, but they had so many problems that they pulled them off the market quickly. And it wasn't for another 10 years that another steam iron came on the market, but it still had its issues. With the earlier steam iron, you would fill the cavity with water. And when you plugged it in, the cavity of water would heat up. And when you called for steam, it would spit out steam, but also droplets of water. And if you had something that was light colored, that water, when it dried, would leave a little ring of rust because of the minerals in the water. But that's the best they had. In 1950, Proctor Silex, with this model, cured the problem. It works similar. You fill the cavity with water, but it doesn't heat up. And when you call for steam with this little switch here, the droplets of water would be superheated. And they would be superheated, and when they spit out, they came out as steam. So that eliminated the problem of staining the clothes. 3 cheers for Proctor Silex. Yeah.
Is that what that is?
That's the first model that was successful. Now, I said earlier that the early houses that had electricity, you might only have one outlet in the parlor, and you might have a floor lamp there. So when you wanted to iron, you would unscrew the bulb in the lamp. And this had a special attachment on it. You would screw that into the socket. And when you want to heat it up, this one has no off and on switch. So when you want to heat the iron, you would pull the chain, and it would heat the iron. And then I told you before, if nobody's looking, right? And this is the little bulb you would screw out, and that's how you would iron. That's one of the early electric irons. And when electric irons were available, to electrify America was a very, very slow procedure. It was very expensive to do, very time-consuming. And it was the Great Depression that Franklin Roosevelt, between 29 and 39, took unemployed men and trained them as volunteers first, and then he would train them as linesmen, and they would start to electrify rural America. And the Great Depression from 29 to 39 caused this. The world had no confidence in the U.S. economy. And on top of that, we got hit with the Dust Bowl. Very, very bad times. And then in 1936, the government created the Rural Electricity Act, which sped up the process. They put a lot of money into it to electrify America. And I've had people in my shows, some from the Appalachian areas, Kentucky, where they had no electricity even as late as 1970. So a lot of these old gadgets I'm showing you to press clothes and wash clothes, they were still manufactured well up into the 1950s. Anybody have any idea what this iron would be used for? This was made by Kodak. After World War II, I had an uncle that was really interested in photography. And I remember he would go down to his little dark room. You couldn't see anything in there. And when he was developing pictures, they would be in some kind of a chemical. And while they're in the solution, you'd see the image appear on the paper, a special paper. Well, if you took them out after the picture developed and the paper dried, the paper curled up. So Kodak invented these low heat irons that you would press the paper, and when they were heated up and dried, they remained flat. These came in different sizes. I told you earlier, I have some really nice irons, small irons. Children might have used them to learn on. This one came from England. This one came from Germany. Very, very good quality. And this one, this is a really early one, and it's European. And for some reason, all the European wooden handles were shaped like that. but this one's in nice condition, nickel plated. Now, I told you about this lady here, Ruth Benarito, 55 patents to her credit. When she graduated college at the age of 16, she went into the textile industry by choice. And they call her the mother of permanent press. But I'm going to go back. I went a little bit ahead of myself. I remember in the 1940s, a salesman would come up to my mother's front door, never knew the guy. He'd be dressed in a nice suit, pressed shirt, nice pressed tie, unknown to her, total stranger. I'd be the only one home with her. But she didn't feel threatened. You would let them in the house. This guy used to demonstrate Electrolux, vacuum cleaners. He had a little bottle of dirt. He threw it on my mother's floor. I said to myself, if that vacuum cleaner doesn't pick that up, he's not walking out of there alive. Because back then, women might only get one new carpet in their lifetime. You know, things were very expensive, wages were low. So anyway, traveling salesman, I don't see that iron with the travel. Anyway, they would buy little travel irons to take with them so they could always look nice. But a lot of times they either forgot them or maybe lost them, etc. They'd either have to buy a new one the next day or borrow one somewhere. This guy here, last name was Janus, from the Midwest. He invented a suitcase that was flying off the shelf. They couldn't make enough. They had factories. He was from the Midwest, but the factories that made these suitcases were from New England. And he made it impossible for you to forget your iron. This is called the Iro case. The handle is a plug-in iron. Oh, here it is. This is the traveling iron. But this would plug in.
That's right.
There's no thermostat, but they work very well. And he should have made a fortune. He should have retired a rich man. But he didn't, because of Ruth Benarito. 1953, she got the nickname, the mother of permanent press. Back in the early 50s, the cotton industry in the South was threatened because Dacron and polyester synthetics were invented and they were wrinkle-free. Cotton wasn't. Miss Benarito, being a chemist, she invented a wrinkle-free cotton. And do you know how she did it? She dipped the cotton, among other things, in formaldehyde. We all know what that is. That's a carcinogen, and it's very, very dangerous. You'll be happy to know today, this shirt that I have on, it's permanent press. Thank you, Mrs. Benarito. But it too was dipped in formaldehyde. You also. But the thing is, years ago, it was dipped. Today, it's either a fine mist or a spray. But because of her invention, it eliminated the need for the travel iron suitcase. So this was only on the market for 7 or 8 years, and then it was no longer needed. And Mrs. Benarito, her wrinkle-free cotton, was blended with Dacron and polyester, and the Brooks Brothers Haberdashery in New York, you might have heard of them, they've been in business forever, but sadly, when the COVID hit a couple of years ago, they went out of business. They forced their bankruptcy. But they made the first permanent press shirt. Who do you think it was made for, men or women? Amen. So, but this woman was a genius. And she also, as a chemist, invented an intravenous food for people who couldn't digest. And she made a food that was made out of a fat product, but it was fed intravenously, and it gave you all the nourishments that you need. So this woman, she really invented an awful lot of things, and she lived to be the ripe old age of 97, and that's one of her older pictures, and this is when she first started out. And she only died 10 years ago. Brilliant woman.
But she was very young when she did all those inventions.
Yes. Yeah, oh, she was, I mean, a 4-year degree at the age of 16. The woman was a genius. I have up here a card of ironing board cover springs. And to give you an idea on the age, the whole set was only 39 cents. And then I have some different clothespins. These are some more clothespins. The whole card was only 25 cents. And here I have a new old stock card of aluminum clothespins. And when I first saw these at an antique store, there's writing on the front, and they call these Hollywood pinups. Now, I grew up in the 40s. Now, that's World War II. And Hollywood pinup referred to, in my era, a beautifully clad bathing suit, Rita Hayworth or somebody like that, Marilyn Monroe, painted on the side of our warplanes that were going to Europe. It lifted up the morale of the pilots. So I'm thinking, what the heck has that got to do with clothespins? Hollywood pinup. So when I went home, this information, I researched it. And I found out in 1944, there were 2 neighbors in California, Hollywood, California, the town. 2 neighbors at the foot of their driveway just talking and fellowshipping. Their wives are hanging clothes on the clothesline. Now, their wives probably went to church the day before. This was on a Monday. But every now and then you heard a blankety blank blank. And what happened was the wooden clothespins they were using split, and the clean clothes they just washed would go on the ground. So the neighbor said, why don't we put our heads together and invent a clothespin that won't split? So they did figure out what they wanted to do. So they got an investor in 1944 to invest $50,000. The guy who invested the 50 grand owned the New York Yankees at the time. So the company was very successful. The guy with the Yankees had a contact with Alcoa Aluminum, and he taught them how to anodize them with color, because these things come in different colors, and also to extrude, I think you need to do under pressure to shape aluminum. And he taught them all that. Company was very successful. So that's the little story. A few years ago, I lived up on the northern tier. I'm looking out of my window in the winter. It was icy and snowy. I'm nice and warm, but it's not the weather you want to go out in. And there was a retirement village in Florida advertised on TV. My wife was in the kitchen making bread. I said, honey, come in. I want you to see this. I said, we could be there in a month. We could sell and get out of this nasty weather. I knew she wasn't going anywhere because we just had 2 twin grandchildren born in Allentown. But I said, honey, look at this. We could be there. You know what she said to me? She looked at me seriously. You know what she said? I'm going to miss you. I couldn't get her away from those kids. So that's a true story. Anyway, just a few nights ago, I'm going to bed. I had the TV on. There's an advertisement for this place down in Florida. It's like a community type of thing, and you buy a house. It's the same guy advertising, the same name on the clothespin, and his name is Dale E. Webb. And that's the same company that's traded today on the New York Stock Exchange. So my point in telling you all that is that when you see something in the antique store, and there's information on it, it's amazing if you take the time to research it, how it all came about. That concludes my program. Do you have any comments, questions? Was it worth your while?
Absolutely.
Was it? Thank you. My wife was a big part of it, and she got me to bring things that ordinarily, as a man, I wouldn't bring. Like my other show, there's homemade clothespin bags. I wouldn't buy one of them for nothing. But she says, nope, the girls will be interested in it. So she was a big part of it, and her humor, after she got over being mad at me for what I spent. But I love doing the shows. I thank you for your interest.